Welcome to Kelowna Now. This is Kent Mulgat, Jim Check, and we are joined by Kevin Falcon, the leader of the BC United Party, kind enough to spend some time with us. How are you enjoying your visit to Kelowna so far?
Oh, it's been great. We had a great town hall last night, and we had over 350 people there. Lots of good questions, and it's been going really well.
Is that at the Ramada though? So that must be almost near capacity there.
Like in fact, they had to open up the room to extend it into the next room, and then people were standing around the walls and all the rest of it. So it was really great, and it was good because for a lot of people, it's important to remind them who BC United is. We're the BC Liberal Party, same party, different name. So we changed the name so that we could, unite people together and hopefully get everyone under one umbrella.
A common theme or question that was kind of like came out of the people that were there?
There was a lot of questions, but I do think that a lot of concern from the agricultural sector about the recent cold snap has been devastating. We're talking about, the grape industry, for example, that they could lose their entire vines, and that means they've got to take them all out, replant. It could be years, 3 to 4 years before they ever see any revenue. So this is existential for many of the wineries. So we do need government to respond quickly. This isn't just a typical bad kind of crop season. Like, this is devastating for a lot of the industry.
I'm glad to hear that that's sunk in, because you look at the amount of ink on that topic has been pretty little. It really, for this region, it's kind of like that atmospheric river was.
Absolutely. Well, and this is why the silence out of Victoria is so frightening to me. This is an emergency, and it's got to be treated like an emergency. And that's what we've said to the government. Get an emergency working group together immediately with representatives from the tree fruit industry and the wine industry, and let's come up with solutions right away. And they can't be the usual crop insurance solutions. That will not deal with the challenges they're facing right now.
Maybe we'll shift to another emergency, a slow-moving one, affordability generally, and specifically for housing. I've heard some BC United Party advertisements on it that are a little thin. Like they say, we'll fix it. And I'm kind of going, and I'm yelling at my radio, well, how? So here we are.
No, for sure. And that's always the challenge when you're getting the message out. The key thing about why we're saying we're going to fix it is because I want the public to know we have a plan. And we got a plan to fix the mental health crisis, the health crisis, and of course the housing crisis. Now, the housing plan we're actually rolling out in the next few weeks. So you'll hear more details about it. But the bottom line is this. And this is something the government doesn't seem to understand. If you want more affordable housing, and just so you know, my background is in housing, okay? So I work for a company called Anthem. We built more housing in a 10-year period than did the entire province of British Columbia. Okay, so I know a thing or two about housing. And one thing I know for sure is something this government doesn't get. If you want more affordable housing, you have to make it less expensive. And what I mean by that is you cannot keep adding more regulatory burden, more taxes, more costs, and expect housing to get cheaper at the end of the road. So that's something that you will see when we roll out our plan. It's particularly focused on making sure that young people and first-time buyers have a line of sight into a credible way to get into housing.
It's a supply and demand thing, though, is it
not? Big part
of
it.
And this government has been criticized for doing too much. They're forcing municipalities to do away with public hearings in a lot of situations.
Well, that's recent, though.
Exactly.
Recent,
that's the problem.
That's absolutely recent.
Year 7.
Is it okay if we talk about what's happening right now? Do you have any issues with what they're doing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I'll support good ideas where they're good. So one of the bills they brought in, which said, let's focus density around transit-oriented development. So that makes total sense. And we supported that bill. I did not support this idea that we're going to take every single family residence in the province and turn it into, potentially 4 units of housing. And I'll tell you why I don't support that. First of all, it won't work. With the experience in California where they tried it, is they had almost no take up. In New Zealand, all it did is resulted in higher housing costs without seeing the benefit of the whole bunch of new supply coming in.
What do you mean?
In other words, people wouldn't go and build these units. And here's why they don't. So take a typical street of 10 homes. And now you're going to make it 40. So when you go in and you take a home and you knock it down and say, I'm going to build 4 now, the problem is you have to upgrade in most cases, all the sewer pipes, the water pipes, the power. It's very, very expensive. Who's going to pay for it? And if you say, well, the developers should pay for it, great. That means they'll pass that cost along to the buyers, which means the housing's not going to be affordable. The other problem you run into is those 10 homes on a single family street. If that suddenly becomes 40 homes, where do people park? And this is a huge issue because they haven't got access to transit. So, the problem is moving away from what 30, 40 years of experience has taught us is that you want to densify around transit corridors, because then you can get people that don't need to drive. They can cycle, they can walk, they can use transit. But if you just sprawl growth all over a community, then people have to drive everywhere. Now you've got more congestion, more pollution, more parking challenges, et cetera.
So you would see those elements undone.
Yes, yeah, because you're not going to, a blanket response like that's not going to fix the problem. What I want is results. And what frustrates me is this government has waited 7 years before they finally come out with this flurry of legislation. Why? Because they know there's an election coming up, and they're scared because they've ended up with the highest housing prices in the country and the highest rents in the country. So, this problem didn't start overnight. 7 years of not dealing with this issue has created a problem where we've got very limited supply and continued ongoing demand, and that's resulted in high prices. This is fundamental economic supply and demand.
And then the regulatory stuff has been a big problem even in Kelowna. And I've heard from developers saying they're waiting a year for a building permit. And what they've done recently makes sense, where they're going to try and clear some of those things where they don't have to wait for the city council hearings for just single family homes. And Kelowna has a really good OCP where they do want to densify all the corridors. But now with the government saying, basically that the city doesn't have as much say in what happens in their own city, that seems odd though too, right? Because what do we have? The city planners are not doing if the government's saying, well, we don't really care what you say, we're going to do just open it up to everything.
Well, and this is a real concern because I've heard from lots of mayors have said the same thing. Here they are, they've planned their communities, they've gone through all that process of building an OCP, and they're going ahead and building housing. And actually, a lot of them are doing a good job, I would argue, especially in Kelowna. But the problem is now the government's come and they've basically taken the table and they've turned it over. So it doesn't matter. All that planning work you've done no longer counts. Now it's going to be 4 units potentially everywhere. Well, here's the problem. What does their planning department do? Now you got someone coming in from, Rutland saying, great, I want four homes here. Now they're diverted in dealing with that issue when they already had a bunch of work happening on the plans that they had in place. So it's created a whole bunch of confusion and unfortunately paralysis now. Nobody knows what to do. And that's not good for housing supply. So, again, the best of efforts can result in the worst of outcomes. And what they should have done is worked with the mayors and the councils and said, listen, because you're right, there are some councils that do a terrible job. I can tell you 1 year to get a permit is lightning speed in the Lower Mainland. There in City of Vancouver, it is not uncommon to take 5 to 6 years just to get a permit to start building a single high-rise in the city of Vancouver. So there's a lot of room for improvement, but we should be working with the municipalities, incentivizing the ones that are doing a good job so that there's a financial benefit to doing the right thing, penalizing the ones that are doing a poor job so that they realize they got to be part of the solution too. And if we do that and get it right, we'll fix it.
There was a bylaw change in Kelowna for carriage homes, which is, if you have a large lot, putting carriage home on your property makes sense. Mm-hmm. It went from $2,500. I'm not sure if I can get these numbers exact. From $2,500 to $25,000. They said the province made them do that. They said they had to increase their capital cost charges on putting in a carriage home. And I think most people then said, "Well, I'm not putting in a carriage home," because I talked to a builder just recently. He said before you're familiar with a home builder, $40,000 just in paperwork before you can even start, in DCCs and stuff like that, just before you can even start a carriage home.
Oh yeah, well look, in the Lower Mainland. The federal government actually finally did something that was going to be good for housing. They said, we're going to take GST off of rental apartments. So if you build rental apartment buildings, they'll remove GST. That actually is a positive step in the right direction.
Huge in Kelowna. We do a story once a week.
Yeah, it's really important. Now, here's the problem. Within days, literally, of that decision being made by the federal government, the Metro Vancouver regional bureaucracy came out with a new regional DCC saying we're going to charge $25,000 for every new home being built in the Lower Mainland. And for every apartment, it's, I think it was $15,000. Again, this is the problem.
For each apartment in a unit. So if there's 100 units times $15,000.
Absolutely. And this is now an additional cost they put on housing. And all of that, just so everyone knows, gets paid not by the developer, by the end user. Yeah, they pass those costs along. So that kind of stuff frustrates me because that's why we're not getting more affordable housing.
Yeah, it seems like they say one thing, but then they put some roadblocks in there in the background that you don't see, right? Which seems silly.
We have other crises.
Sure.
Yeah.
We have a few. We have a few
to get to. I think you had an experience in downtown Kelowna today, a little taste of the fact that we have a virtual community developing along what we call our rail trail here, where you've got this kind of tent city, which are familiar around the province. It's a really difficult problem, but I understand that you do have some ideas on what a BC United Party government would do to try to deal with that.
Yes, I do. And it's two key areas. Number one, on the mental health side, because there's a lot of people with severe untreated mental health. And I think we just have to acknowledge that governments, including the one I was part of, all the way back to the social credit days when the decision was made to close down these so-called mental institutions like Riverview, Essendale, Tronquil, we made a mistake in the sense that the pendulum swung too far the other way. And what happened is a lot of people with untreated mental health were released into the communities without proper supports. And you see them on the streets today. I experienced it just on the way to a radio interview this morning with a gentleman lying on the streets, yelling and swearing. They call him the rage man, apparently. They told me in the radio station. But that's very frightening if you're a young woman or a child walking along the street. And so that's a perfect example of why we're going to build purpose-built facilities, including in the interior, where we can take folks with untreated severe mental health off the streets involuntarily if necessary into proper 24/7 care so that they can be looked after, stabilized, and get to a place where hopefully we can release them back into the community with genuine supports. Some may never go back, to be honest. Some have, through repeated drug overdoses or other issues, have acquired brain injuries, which mean they're never going to get back to being perfectly operating human beings. But they deserve a duty of care, and that's true compassion, is looking after them. So that's number one.
Hang on.
Yeah, sure.
You use the word release. You're talking about, in some cases, involuntary.
Yes. And I say that because I want people to understand it's controversial in some circles, not mine, but in some circles, because people say, well, wait a minute, they have rights. Here's my counter argument. These folks are not able to make decisions in their own best interest. I have literally met people that I was doing a press conference in Vancouver. A gentleman, a homeless person, dropped his pants right beside us while we were talking, not to expose himself or be silly, but because his leg was literally rotting away as a result of some of the drugs he was on that has a component that causes your flesh to rot. And there is and he's basically saying, help me. And, this is ridiculous. Like, that person needs help. And the problem is they can't make decisions in their own best interest. We have a duty, an obligation, I would argue, as society, to make sure those folks are looked after. If it was you or me, I sure hope you would do that for me.
But going into that sort of a mode, you would have to agree that you are on a dangerous, slippery slope where you really have to watch who's the arbiter of who needs to have their freedoms taken away.
Sure, and that's why we have psychiatrists and medical professionals that can make that decision. And believe me, I have talked to the top psychiatrists in the province, and they tell me, Kevin, we have to do this. Because right now what's happening is a lot of these folks are either in hospitals with security guards in front of the rooms. They don't know where to place them, where to put them, because there's nowhere for them to go. And then they get released in the streets and they violently assault people sometimes. And that's, again, they've got a mental health issue that's untreated. We need to make sure they get the treatment. So I'm willing to take the slings and arrows of people that say, well, I think you're trampling on civil rights, because to me, the duty to protect the public and to protect those individuals takes priority.
Another related issue, the decriminalization of hard drugs.
Yeah.
You would consider that a failed experiment?
Terrible experiment.
And
we said from the outset this was going to be a failed experiment. All they had to do was look at Portland, Oregon. In Portland, Oregon, the so-called progressive left, whatever you want to call them, Democrats went ahead with decriminalization there. It's been such a disaster. They've now said it's an emergency.
They declared a state of emergency.
State of emergency.
Recently, yeah.
They're now rolling back decriminalization, and they've recognized it was a failure. We told this government, look, just to be clear, I don't want people charged for carrying small amounts of drugs, but the police tell me they were rarely ever charging people with 2.5 grams or less. They only did it if they were on a playground or at a school or something extreme. But the problem is, by decriminalizing drugs with no guardrails, what's happened is an explosion of open drug use in our parks, our playgrounds, our beaches, and the police cannot do anything about it because they have no tools now. We've got drug dealers coming from across the country to BC because they realize now they can sell drugs here with impunity because they're not going to be arrested. And it's been a disaster in the outcomes. 2,511 people died of an overdose Last year, the worst we've ever seen in the history of the province.
Go ahead, Jim.
You've highlighted some of the, I think there's quite a few crises going on in British Columbia and in Canada in general. You've highlighted quite a few of these crises. The NDP's had the wheel here in British Columbia for about 8 years.
Yeah.
And the Liberals have had the wheel for about 8 years in federal politics. Do you think, and this is going to be a tougher question, I think, do you think not coming together with John Rustad and the two parties that you guys are just going to basically give back the mandate to the NDP? If these crises are so critical to British Columbians, not coming together as a I guess a united conservative or more right leaning political environment, how can you guys really mount a serious effort against the NDP in British Columbia?
No, it's a really good question, actually, because that's why one of the reasons why we changed our name to BC United is because we do want to unite what I call the free enterprise vote. These are, mainstream, common sense, thoughtful folks that just want to get the economy back on track and get things fixed in the province. And we have always had a problem with BC Conservatives over the years. They are not connected to the federal Conservative Party. It's a totally different party. They typically hold, interesting views, to put it mildly, on a range of subjects, and they find it difficult electing people because at the end of the day, by the time the election comes around, people say those people are too extreme. Not going to support that. And so the bottom line is, a lot of people say, oh, the horse race polls show that, they're in second place. I can tell you right now, I've been around for a while. That's just voter confusion. People are like, I'm not sure who BC United is. That name doesn't ring a bell. Conservative, oh yeah, definitely. Pierre Poilievre,
but
that's us.
Aren't they just riding on that coattail?
Of course they are. Of course they are.
But how do you get that message?
Well, the way we get the message across is what you've seen started in the last few days, where we have a major ad campaign that's underway that you'll see over the next 3 months that's going to be talking about Kevin Falcon and BC United and the challenges that we face and how we're going to fix them. And that gets the message across to the public. And as we get closer to the election, you will see that people are going to look around and say, wait a minute, oh, okay, that's not Pierre Poilievre's group. Who are they? What do they stand for? They want nuclear power and BC. What? Like that kind of stuff is going to, those questions will start to come up.
I think I saw you quoted as calling the polls BS, but we've seen a few of them, and I must say a lot of people who are long-term supporters of your party are worried about that.
Oh, yes. And I don't want you to think it's not something we don't worry about. It's just something I don't panic about because I've seen this movie before. In 2013, when I was in the private sector, I'd retired as finance minister in 2012. I remember 1 week before the election campaign started, the BC Liberals, my party, which is now called BC United, were 22 points down in the polls. Okay, the entire media establishment, all the mainstream media people, the Vaughn Palmers and the Keith Baldrys and stuff, it's over. The NDP is going to win for sure. Well, guess what? We won a majority.
That was Adrian Dix.
That's right. That's when Adrian Dix, he was supposed to be the premier. And what happened? Well, the polls were totally wrong. Look at Vancouver elections. A party called ABC. A year before the election, nobody knew who ABC was. Nobody thought they were going to win. They won every single seat they ran a candidate for. So do understand that while I get the nervousness, I'm very confident. At the end of the day, the public's a lot smarter than we give them credit for. They look at the leaders and they say, who's going to be the best premier to get this province turned around? And I feel my chances are going to be very good when they look at me compared to EB.
You've said that people wouldn't recognize John Rustad.
Yes.
And as they start to, as this campaign starts to happen, as he begins to put himself out there, you think that'll work against him?
Yes, I do. Yeah, look, I worked with John for many years. There's the reason I fired him out of the caucus. The problem is John continued to tweet out climate denial, saying he doesn't believe in any climate change. And I said to John, that's okay for you to not believe in that if you've changed your opinion. He supported a revenue neutral carbon tax for 4 elections, right? I said, John, if you've changed your opinion, that's okay too. We can have that debate and discussion in our caucus room. That's what parties do. Believe me, we have lots of vigorous debates over policy.
Don't tweet it out.
Yeah, but you can't just leave the room as part of a team and then just start tweeting out stuff that undermines, principles that we've stood for many, many years. He just said he couldn't abide by that. And I said, okay, well then you can't be part of a team. So, that's unfortunate. I hate to see it happen, but that's the way it is.
So, this backdrop, though, you talk to people here in Kelowna and around the Okanagan, you've got provincial NDP candidates saying, hey, you mean there's a chance? I mean, because it's sort of, it's now like a 3-way race.
Right.
So it has changed the lay of the land at this point. We'll see how it evolves, I guess, as we start to see real campaigns form.
Is there a chance, I'm just going to throw this out, is there a chance that somehow some of the candidates they're going to run will kind of like favor the BC United Party instead of, because I mean, they must see, as your candidates must see, like that this is definitely going to water down, even if it's a little bit watered down, the vote, right?
Absolutely. And look, I'm always open to, I'll work with anybody to, bring the Free Enterprise Coalition together. I've spent my entire adult life doing nothing but that. Back when we were BC Liberals, I remember, the Reform Party was a real threat in the day. The BC Reform Party, actually, Bill Van der Zandt was the leader for a while. And I remember talking to all my, Reform friends and Conservative friends and saying, we got to get together. And they said, well, we hate the Liberal name. We're not Liberals. I said, it's a separate party. It's not connected to the federal party. This is an ongoing thing. So this isn't the first time we've dealt with it. But look, I'll work with anyone to try and get rid of the NDP, but you got to understand the difference. John Rustad is not running to be premier. There's no scenario in which he will ever be premier of this province. I'm running to be premier of the province. That's a big difference. And we've got 26 MLAs in the official opposition. We've got 50,000 members across the province. We raised more money in the last quarter of last year in our history. We had our most successful fundraising effort. That's why we're able to put out a major campaign to talk about BC United and Kevin Falcon. And I think you'll see that makes a difference.
One question that's kind of like on the minds of many people in Kelowna, including our city council and a couple of councils in other areas in the Okanagan, the Airbnb decision. And Kelowna's asked for an exemption for some of our properties that are zoned and designed to be Airbnb properties. And the province has come back and said no. Yeah. So people made investments based on the law that was in place, the bylaws that are in place. Does that not scare investment money into other provinces or other places if the province can come out and just take those properties, even if the city says it's in the best interest of our municipality?
Oh, of course. Look, this was a terrible piece of legislation, very poorly thought out. So let's back up. Why did the NDP do this? They did this because they said they were trying to get more inventory back into the rental market. Okay. A reasonable objective. We said to them, we put forward amendments and said there's some reasonable amendments we can do here that will make this a better piece of legislation. So, for example, we pointed out 1% of the people that own Airbnbs generate 20% of the revenues. In other words, there's a very small group that own multiple. They're basically running a business. You can go after those folks, make sure that that inventory goes back, but don't go after the mom and pops, the person that may own one place. And target them as the problem. That's not right. They refused that. Then we said, you've got to have an exemption for, the Airbnb rules, short-term rentals should apply to 30 days and less, only, because we've got the movie industry. We've got people that travel for medical reasons that come to the Lower Mainland. We've got traveling doctors and nurses that need places to stay for 2 to 3 months while they're in a community. The NDP said no to that too. And we said there needs to be an exemption. What happens when you have a major event like Taylor Swift when she comes to Vancouver? There's going to be almost 300,000 people descending on the city of Vancouver over a couple of nights from not just across the province and the Lower Mainland, but around the world. And we said to them, where are they going to stay? NDP didn't accept that either. And already we see in Vancouver, a couple from Florida was in the news trying to book a place at the Days Inn. Okay, this is not a high-end hotel.
Imagine the price.
Yeah, over $2,000 a night. And that's what happens when you've got...
Is there breakfast with that?
No, yeah, exactly. They were horrified. This poor couple.
That is taking advantage of the situation 100%. And that's what happens when you kind of like favor an industry and all of a sudden the toothpaste gets squeezed into a corner.
They don't understand the market. This is a government... I'm sorry to say this. None of them come from the private sector. They do not understand the fundamental supply-demand economics. Just like in housing, if you take away a bunch of supply, right here in Kelowna, purpose-built buildings that the city said, yes, these can be Airbnbs because they help us deal with the tourism impacts of everyone wanting to come to the valley here to see the great wine industry and the beautiful lakes, et cetera. And yet the government says, nope, cannot do that. Well, this is, I think it's just an outrageous overreach.
I just had a realtor on that said, based on that, because he owns some restaurants. He owns a couple of restaurants in town, and he's a realtor, and he does a lot of clients that he says he has lots of, like millions and millions of dollars of people that made, that single investment property. And what he's getting from a lot of those people is they want to sell, and that tourism is dead in the Okanagan. That's his statement, not mine. But Airbnbs in this valley do help, and I think they work well for people. Like my son has one where he lives in it in the wintertime and then rents it out in the summer so he can pay for his mortgage. Otherwise, he can't even afford his mortgage because he's a young guy. But it also, lots of Airbnbs in the Okanagan would suit students during the off-peak seasons, and then Airbnb in those 4 months. And then everybody wins, right? Because now you get cheaper housing for students.
Absolutely.
And then plus you get, even if they made the exemption and said you can Airbnb for these 4 months, so that especially for tourism meccas, Penticton, Kelowna, and that kind of stuff, because realistically that's where it is, and then make them do long-term rentals during the off-peak times.
So it sounds like you would at least make some major modifications.
Absolutely. Because that story about your son, I met a young couple that were literally in tears because they were renting, they had an Airbnb, and they were doing the Airbnb to pay down the mortgage so that one day they could move into it. That was their plan.
That's a lot of people, actually.
A lot of people. They made this plan. They're working on this plan. And suddenly government comes in and just wipes out that entire option for them.
They're
been
devastated. A lot of people talking about class action lawsuits.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's such massive government overreach and done so poorly thought out. And as I say, we put forward recommendations, amendments. They refused all of them. The other thing I'll say, too, is the hypocrisy. David Eby sold a condo in Victoria just a week before they brought in the speculation tax. His condo was advertised as an Airbnb-friendly condo, and he made a good profit from selling that. And then they bring in the speculation tax shortly after that. It's just like, it just drives me
I've
crazy.
got a self-serving question here.
Yeah.
Local media, even any media. I mean, we see the news this morning, Bell Media, BCE announcing the sale of 45 stations because they clearly said not a viable business. Black Press recently declared bankruptcy, going into protection. Kamloops this week recently put it out that they closed completely online and their paper, saying that Bill C-18 basically did them in. We're closing one of our things in Victoria. We get no funding from the government. We get zero. How does local media, when I don't know where you guys do your advertising, but like, we get no provincial ads, we get no spend on our platform. We're a local independent media. We get no provincial. I mean, the province says they support, like EB came out and said, oh, we support independent media because during the fires, Bill C-18 basically doesn't allow people to see news on, where they traffic mostly. They go to Facebook and Instagram. So we're blocked from that, one of our strengths. Yet the province, I believe, still advertises on Facebook, doesn't support local independent media. Would your government do anything different?
Yes, actually, I have to tell you, I'm really concerned about this. Just as a parent of kids and somebody that's, goes into public life, not because I need this job, but because I do care about the future, I'm very, very worried about transparency and accountability for politicians and governments is really important. We don't need less media, we need more. And we cannot have a situation where we are losing independent journalism and stopping young people from considering a career in journalism, whether it's, independent like you're doing at Kelowna now, or whether it's the radio stations you just referenced. This is a huge concern. And I can tell you, it frustrates me that the federal government it seems to be, they're just in the standoff with Meta. And, they've got to figure this out somehow, because the sideswipe and the hits that companies are taking are brutal, and the lack of information that's now not being shared amongst the public about what's going on in their own communities.
It's unsafe in times like fires and stuff like that, and we can't call Facebook. There's nobody for us to call to say, hey, can you help us out? And then we've reached out to the Heritage Minister and they won't talk to us, and so we don't seem to have anywhere to go. And the social media platform was a symbiotic relationship for us, like it is for most news outlets, because we put our information there willingly. They don't come and take it from us. We put it there willingly because it's a like I said, symbiotic relationship. We put it there, they give us traffic. Right?
I spend a lot of time thinking about this, to be honest, because honestly, I'd love to just get dollars to those organizations so that they can continue to do the great work. But I'm also keenly aware that, the moment you're taking government money, then people will question the independence. I want to figure out a way that we can support the sector without the sector feeling in any way like they owe me anything or they're thankful or any of that kind of stuff, just because it's the right thing to do.
Wouldn't it be better, Justin? Sorry,
help me.
Wouldn't it be better? I would agree with no funding for any media. Like, I'm not asking for funding, no funding for any media. Just stop spending on those platforms that you say are killing media, because the federal government, provincial government spend a ton on the other platforms, right? But they're the ones that pulled their support from local independent media. Why don't they spread their money around? And then instead of having that big fight with Facebook, why not just say, okay, we're going to spend our money with local media?
Yeah, well,
because they spend a lot.
That's a great idea. I think that's a very good idea.
That seems like a better idea to me than hurting local independent media. Because I think because if we only end up with two medias that are funded by the government, then we don't really have independent media, right? Because if we squeeze out all the small ones, and like if we look
that'd
at
be the
Kelowna
socialist dream. The NDP would probably love that.
If we look at Kelowna right now, Kelowna Capital News, and 3 stations from Bell so far, and then in Kamloops, you know what I mean. If we keep,
they're being sold. Do we know what the ultimate fate is? Of
I think in this one that Vista Radio is buying the ones
That's
locally,
right? Yeah.
right?
So okay,
But every time they sell stuff, they cut it back, and we see that with reporters getting laid off. We see that in all kinds of places, right? So, and I'll leave it there. And
okay, well, I can transition into this one because let's face it. The media presence in our communities is wounded now as we head into this campaign.
Yes.
And, your counterpart, David Eby, he's expressed concerns about having John Rustad in this race, that he will import, some of the culture wars that we see in the United States. And then, he sees that getting kind of ugly in a way that we haven't seen here before. Do you share those concerns?
Well, look, David Eby is the happiest person in the world about John Rustad and the BC Conservatives.
He's not saying that, but
of course, he's very happy. In fact, I'm suspicious that there's even some support that they're providing the BC Conservatives because.
Hang on, you're not suggesting that he has provided financial support?
No, it may not be financial, but let's just say that I'm suspicious that there may be some support there because it's in his interest to try and boost the BC Conservatives to divide the center-right vote. But again, I just think that the population is a lot smarter than we give them credit for. They figure it out. They're not paying attention to politics right now, I promise you. They are focused on trying to raise their kids, trying to, meet their family budget in the most unaffordable province in the country, as the media have reported. That's what their struggle is. When the election comes around, believe me, they'll pay attention and they'll make a right decision.
One of the biggest things I won't keep here too long, but one of the biggest things I think Canadians are facing right now is a lot of mortgages, we've seen the stats, are about to renew.
Yes.
And they're renewing where the payments are probably going to double. And a lot of people aren't going to be able to afford those payments. And I know the provinces has much say or not a lot of influence on what happens with the Bank of Canada interest rates and all that stuff. So how do we help the people that may not even be able to afford to stay in the home they've already purchased?
Yeah, well, this is where the public really has to understand. Look, this government's been there, like, as you say, for almost 8 years. They've introduced or increased 30 new taxes. We've got the highest income tax rate in the country at 53.5%, taking over half your paychecks depending on what you earn. And it's no wonder that families are really struggling. Highest housing prices, highest rents, highest fuel prices. I've gone through the list. And they want to triple the carbon tax in the next 6 years. They're going to continue. They've already more than doubled it. They're taking all that money into government at a time when people are struggling. And now, as you say, these mortgages are coming up and people are going to find that they're getting hit even harder, having to make much larger mortgage payments. I know what that's all about because, mine went up quite considerably when I renewed it about 6 months ago. And a lot of people will be in the same position. And that's not a fun thing to have to deal with.
A lot of people don't have that. Yeah, a lot of people don't have that room. And we'll let it go there because I know that you don't have a ton of time with us. But I do have a fun question for you. So the Super Bowl goes, I think, this weekend, right?
Yeah.
And Taylor Swift will likely be at the game because her boyfriend, our partner,
Kelsey,
will be playing for the Kansas City Chiefs, which I understand are the favorites, but I'm not sure. I don't follow football a lot. My question is, how much camera time does Taylor Swift get?
Okay, this is interesting because my children, who are 14 and 11, both girls, love Taylor Swift. So
they're Swifties.
Yeah, they're Swifties, and I'm assaulted by Taylor Swift music all the time when I come home.
She's a billionaire, too.
She's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. It's remarkable. But even they know that there's a Super Bowl and that she's going to be in it, and that ought to tell you something. And so it's going to be interesting to me to see. I'm going to predict that she gets 1 minute worth of FaceTime on TV.
When they do the halftime show, maybe it'll just be her.
I'm gonna go way higher than that.
Really?
I'm gonna say more than 2.5 minutes total.
I'm going to say in the middle there, but I'm going to say at least 10 pans to her. At least 10 pans.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Where
Okay.
they, you know, like where he scores or something like that, and the shot's on her
So you're
instead of
saying
the football
at least
field,
10
right?
separate looks.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like instead of like, oh, they just scored, and right, Taylor Swift, right?
Yeah. Oh, it'll be interesting.
It'll help them with the marketing of the game for sure for young people.
Absolutely.
It'll
And
really
winners.
boost, and they'll take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it's a great thing for the NFL. There's
I think
no question.
the big odds in Las Vegas are will he propose on the field after they win the Super Bowl?
Oh, they got odds on everything. What color shirt she's going to wear.
Oh, yeah.
How many times she'll be on TV, how long.
You wanted to talk about gambling real quick, right?
But I think we're out of time. Maybe another time we'll ask
Sure.
you what your thoughts on the proliferation of this sport.
Yeah.
Short answer, you're not super...
No, I'm always concerned. Look, as a government, I can tell you we've had casinos, and I get it generates a lot of money for government, but it also generates a lot of social ills. We cannot ignore that reality.
I mean, that money comes out of pockets of people who can least afford it.
That's exactly
so
right.
often. Yeah. Thanks so much for your time.
No problem.
It was
Thank
really an interesting conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks
a lot again.
I appreciate you guys.
And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.